Welcome, everyone. I'm Pat from Elite Retrievers. We've got some great speakers tonight. Dr. Jenell Appel and Dr. Sarah Love. I'm going to talk quickly about the topics that we're going to cover, and these topics were based mostly on questions and the things that both the doctors wanted to cover, and we're going to start a little bit about what exactly is conditioning. I'm going to get in more in depth on that. We're going to talk about the components of a conditioning program. We're going to talk about some strength training. We're going to talk about balance, flexibility. Jenell's going to cover some of that. We're also going to talk a little about cranial cruciate ligament disease. It's a big issue, and there's going to be some stuff that we're going to cover on that. We're going to talk about older dogs, keeping them in shape, supplements, medications, things like that. We're going to hopefully cover hydration strategies and glycogen replenishment, game day stuff, during intense exercise, hunting, and competition. Anyways, those are just a few of the things. Both these doctors will cover them in greater depth. You know what? You saw the little briefing that we had. I gave a little story about Mike and his comments on one of his better springs and how important he felt Dr. J was in making that happen and the things she helped implement. You saw a little bit of the beginning of a sled dog race. It was, if I'm not mistaken, it's the stagecoach stop. I know, and it's one of the biggest stage races in the lower 48 in Wyoming. I've had friends compete in it, and you saw those incredible athletes taking off. You saw a little bit of some of the preliminary balance ball work. You saw some figure eights for stretching. You saw some early conditioning. You saw some swimming, some kayaking, all good stuff. I'm sure it'll be covered in this session. And I guess first of all, I want to tell you about, I met Jenell probably 10 years ago, maybe 10 years plus. And we sat at a meeting for the Snowbird Retriever Club, and she started to talk to us about the things and her vision, and it was fabulous stuff. And it's been incredible what she's been able to do for us. And oh, my wife just reminded me to press record, which we didn't do last time. Now we're doing it. Fantastic. All right, you didn't get to hear all my stuff on record, but that's okay too. Anyways, Jenell, I've just thoroughly enjoyed our time together, and I look forward to the future. The things you've done at nationals, keeping dogs going, keeping them feeling good so they can compete. You know, it's just like what you see at that blue tent at an NFL game when the player goes in there and needs some treatment. That's the kind of stuff Jenell does to keep these dogs going. Been an important part of some of these dogs that have got national wins, keeping them together. Sarah, I think of that sled dog connection. We've met at nationals. But we've got a similar path. I spent a year in Alaska working with a good mutual friend of all of ours, Dr. Arlie Reynolds. And I really had a passion for learning more about conditioning and nutrition. And I know both of you have had a chance to spend time with Arlie. I know Sarah knows him really quite well. And so anyways, just that's a little bit about my story. I'm going to quit talking, and I'm going to hand this off to Sarah. So Sarah, why don't you get started? Because that's what I've got on my agenda. We've got Sarah. You're going to talk about maybe what exactly conditioning is. Please.
All right. Thanks, Pat. We put together this agenda for this hour, and it ends up that we have a weekend seminar. So let's see how much we can get through. But we really wanted to start with conditioning because there's a little bit of misinformation out there, not necessarily just in the retriever world, but in the athletic dog world of what conditioning really is. And many people, when they think of conditioning, they think of dogs running alongside a four-wheeler, and that's conditioning, and the conditioning program that we would make for you and your dog, or a pro and his or her kennel of dogs. But it's actually quite a bit more than that. It starts certainly with the overall wellness of each individual animal, and even things like preventative medications and just a general wellness program. The most important thing to think about with that, as well as all of this as we go through the whole hour, is that every dog is an individual. And even though we set up conditioning programs, and both Jenell and I work with kennels and groups of dogs, every dog is an individual. So it's really quite difficult for us to say, here's your conditioning program. Hi, nice to meet you. Here's your conditioning program for your dog, because every dog is certainly quite different and has different needs. Even though a lot of Black Labs look alike, they're all quite different, whether it's their environment, their health and wellness, their history, their physical exam, and maybe any kind of chronic things going on or not chronic things. So that's one thing I'd really like to stress, is that Jenell and I both think a conditioning program is very much an individual thing. So, and a conditioning program is not just running alongside a four-wheeler. There are many components to it beyond wellness and physical exams. So we'll get into the components of it, but we can talk a little bit about each of those, but just know that it's really not just roading on a great surface with a four-wheeler. Things are good. There's so much more into a conditioning program that we can get into and use for our patients, our pets, our athletes, and primarily our athletes, to improve performance, improve their mental attitude, and especially, decrease the risk of injury, but especially improve longevity in the field, because we see a lot of these dogs that by 7, they're having chronic issues that we don't necessarily need to see at 7. So we want to avoid that and keep their longevity as athletes as long as we can, but as best as we can, with the most quality that we can. So one of, we think about conditioning, again, we'll get into the components of it, but we think about conditioning as a physical, having physical benefits, but it has mental benefits as well for the dog, and hopefully for the handler as well. It certainly allows a handler or a trainer to see a dog in a different light, because they may see them performing in a different way, doing it while they're doing a different task. So they may not necessarily be a superstar in the field, but they may be a superstar and as they go throughout their conditioning program. So there's a great bond that can be made with a dog. Even if you're conditioning a whole kennel of dogs, you really certainly can bond well with your dog, or even a kennel of dogs. It's kind of hard to take in that, but you certainly interact differently with dogs when you're doing a one-on-one activity, whether it's balancing on the balancing ball, putting a harness on them, or talking to them as they're roading, or doing some flexibility exercises with them. It's a very different dynamic that is something that you have to a little bit trust us, that as you experience it, you see that, wow, this is a little different. And it whether you think about it or not, you may be strengthening that bond and having developing a better rapport, or a rapport in general, with that dog. There's certainly less pressure while they're conditioning. It's certainly, we want to make it enjoyable and maybe even fun. It's certainly not fun all the time if they're running miles and miles, or doing some strength training that is hard. But it's pressure in a different way. It's pressure that's outside of their field environment. So that can be beneficial for the dog. It's a great release of energy for some of those dogs that are a bit, have lots of energy. So I have one of those as well. So I love to do tasks and conditioning, roading, flexibility, not just cardiovascular things, but things to release energy and make them think in a different way. So those are all mental benefits, as well as a big one that is seen in human athletes. And I'm pretty keen on looking at in our dogs is overtraining syndrome and overreaching syndromes. They certainly can develop that, whether they're on a pros truck and training year round, or at home and training with their owner, amateur owner. They certainly can develop overtraining or overreaching syndrome. And it just, in a nutshell, what those are certainly going beyond the dog's capability mentally and physically at that time, and can cause some detrimental damage mentally and physically. So overtraining, overreaching are certainly things that we try and avoid. And it's a big subject of research in human athletes, and it's really fascinating to me in our dogs too, and trying to learn about it in our dogs. So that's certainly a great thing to try and decrease with conditioning program. So those are some of the mental brainy benefits. And so obviously the physical benefits, we know that it improves their overall fitness. It can certainly be helpful in times when there may need to be rehabilitation, whether it's a CCL injury, a cruciate ligament injury, or even just a muscle strain or sprain, or a tendon strain or sprain. The more conditioned a dog, we know that they will bounce back quicker and have less downtime. So that's certainly a benefit. It also, you may not know, it also improves a dog's ability to thermoregulate. We'll talk about, if we have time, we'll talk about heat stress later, but allowing the body to appropriately use the work that it's doing towards the work, and not necessarily towards trying to cool itself down. So maintaining an appropriate body temperature is a great thing that conditioning can do. And it actually can also help a dog have better olfaction or smell capabilities, which is, we all want that when they're trying to get the least amount of hint, tiny iota bit of smell from that hen pheasant. So those are some physical benefits that we can see from a conditioning program beyond just bulking up, better cardiovascular fitness and that sort of thing. So there were some questions about age and whatnot, and we'll talk about that. But I just want you to know that Jenell's a really big nerd, and we try and look at things that are in the literature. We try and do things with these fuzzy, sweet little creatures in a scientific manner. So I just want you to know that there's good data out there. We just don't have enough in veterinary medicine, but there's good data out there that in the literature that shows that dogs that we can extrapolate or take from humans to dogs, that humans that do some sort of conditioning or cross training have an improved oxygen efficiency use, or VO2 max. You may have heard of that. So whether they're runners or swimmers or sprinters or marathon runners or rowers, the work that they do in conditioning can transfer to their primary sport and improve their VO2 max or oxygen efficiency, which we didn't think would happen long ago. It certainly can improve their muscle size. We know that with strength training, but it can also improve their muscle velocity, the force of their muscle movement. So that certainly can improve their performance. And then a study I just read yesterday showed that humans that had ACL or cruciate surgery had decreased time of disability and decreased time of pain in those human athletes that underwent a conditioning program prior to their injury and surgery versus athletes that did not undergo a conditioning program or cross training before their injury. So that was great. As far as age, there were a couple questions about age and when to start conditioning. Puppies are a great age to start. We can certainly start them with low impact activities when they're young. As soon as you get that puppy at 49 days or 8 weeks or 10 weeks, you can certainly start low impact activities. That doesn't mean that you take them out on a four-wheeler and run them. But we certainly can start them young with some of these balance activities that we'll talk about and flexibility activities. And another low impact activity that I highly recommend in puppies are nature walks, because they get some cardiovascular effects from that. They get some balance effects from that when they are hopping over logs or walking on logs and walking on uneven terrain. Flexibility as they move over uneven terrain. So puppies can certainly do those low impact activities, nature walks, balance. Strength training is I typically bring it in at around 6-7 months of age. You certainly don't want to do all the strength training activities that an adult would do, because that for a 6 or 7 month old puppy, because their bones, their muscles, their tendons aren't fully mature, and you can cause some pretty detrimental career-ending damage if you do some of those adult things. So, and then roading will certainly, Jenell and I both agree that roading or cardiovascular training, as far as roading, usually starts later than cardiovascular training in the water because of the impact. So certainly swimming, we can start at an earlier age, but roading, we really want to do those high impact activities when their growth plates are closed. And we don't always know when those growth plates are closed unless we take an x-ray, a radiograph, but around 14 months of age for your average Labrador is when those growth plates close. So that's when we would start roading them and feeling okay about having those higher impact activities. So that being said, there's a whole mix of conditioning activities, just as a reminder, that we can do low impact, high impact. There's certain ages that we can do them and want to do them at. And remember, many people are excited about their dog or excited about this conditioning program. They want to get started, and your dog will do it. We all know will do almost anything for you. But I remind people their brains are pretty small, and we need to help them control some of those things we do with them and not let them injure themselves. So I think we'll talk about a little bit now components of a conditioning program. The big things that us practitioners of canine sports medicine, when we think about conditioning programs, yes, we think of cardiovascular or endurance as a tool that we use to improve a dog's condition. We think about strength training. We think about this thing called proprioception, which is balance. Balance training is super important. And we think about flexibility as part of that conditioning program. And I always think about, it's not in there per se, but I also think about nutrition as well, as far as having appropriate nutrition for the stage of growth that animal is at, or stage of life, and appropriate nutrient intake for their growth and their energy output. But it's not one of our 4 big pillars, but it's certainly something to always think about, is nutrition. So as far as components, we can move on. Jenell, I think, wants to talk about cardiovascular training, or also called endurance training.
Sarah, that was great stuff. Thank you so much.
Oh, you bet.
I'm going to, we've got lots of folks watching. We've got Are you hearing me now, everybody? You got me? Okay, yeah, I got you. We've got Lisa Claire, Matt Voigt, Jason Schumann, Mike Rogan, Barb Younglove. Thanks, Barb. And Carrie Lavin, Beth Johnson. Lots of folks joining in. And once again, Sarah, that was fantastic stuff. And we got a call coming in on the side. We don't need that. But now we're going to talk to Sarah or to Jenell. Jenell's going to talk. I think you're going to talk a little about cardiovascular endurance. Jenell, I think that's where you're headed with this.
That's where we're going. So we're going to discuss at first the roading program, which many people had questions about specifics of. So my biggest pet peeve with roading is a lot of people ask me, is it okay to free road my dogs? And what I say to that is what I told Mike Lardy when he asked me. I said, absolutely not. And he said, well, I want to do it anyway. So let's put a GPS tracker on a couple of dogs and let them run next to the four-wheeler and see what happens. So I said, yeah, great. Let's do it. Well, with that data, we found out that we had several dogs out of the truck that ran about 4 more miles than the rest of the dogs because they could lap everybody else. So obviously the consistency was a huge concern there. And the other part of it that people don't think about is some dogs are able to stop and start when they're not harnessed in a free roading system, because just like us being on a treadmill, if we don't have a trainer next to us and we get tired, we can hit that down button very quickly. And the same with a dog that is not restricted in any way. They can stop and start in their run, in their canter, and there's no real consistency to a free road. So even though it's fun for the dog and fun mentally, it's really has minimal physical benefits in terms of conditioning itself. So the goal of a roading program is to maintain a consistent pace. And that's mostly because we want to reach that target heart rate and maintain that heart rate. When a dog stops and sniffs on the side of the road, he's dropping his heart rate very quickly. And same system, if we're on the treadmill and we decide we just need to take it down a few clicks. So by keeping them in a consistent pace, we're keeping them at that consistent heart rate, max heart rate that we want to improve our cardiac endurance. When I start a program with dogs, the other question I get a lot is, my dog is in great shape, so I feel like I should be able to start off and road them for 30 to 40 minutes, no problem with the amount of work that they do. And what I say is the interesting part is, even though the dog is in full training and working every single day, that type of work is very different than endurance conditioning. So what I consider our dogs to be is sort of endurance sprinters. They're not sled dogs and they're not sprinting dogs. They sort of do a little bit of both. So they sprint out to the bird and hopefully they bring it right back, but many times we know that's not the case. So in their hunting, they now become endurance athletes. And so we really have to work our conditioning program based on that type of activity that they're having to deal with on a daily basis. So with the roading system, I like to start at 10 minutes and work up from there. And people think I'm crazy. My dog can do 10 minutes, no problem. Well, the interesting thing is they actually can't. If you start most dogs that have never roaded before at a consistent pace at a trot, they're actually pretty gassed after 10 minutes. It's a pretty interesting thing to see. So what I tell people is we start them out at a slow to moderate trot. And the best way to understand what that pace is like is to think about a gait pattern of a dog. So when a dog is loping or coming in from a retrieve, that's when they're using the front limbs, they're placing their front limbs down and then their back limbs. So they're sort of looking like a horse that's loping through the field. When they're trotting, they have 2 feet on the ground at all times. So one forelimb and the opposite hind limb. And when we're watching them run, the run again is sort of like an accelerated lope. So they're picking up their forelimbs, pulling them under, and their hind limbs are advancing underneath their body at the same time. So when they're running, actually all 4 paws are off the ground at the same time in an instant. So what we're really looking for is the trot, which is where 2 limbs are on the ground at the same time. For most dogs, I would say based on my experience, 5 to 6 miles per hour is typical to get a dog in a slow to moderate trot. The taller guys, usually you can get up to 7 to 8 to get them into a decent trot. So it really depends on the leg length of your dog, but the idea is to keep them at a consistent moderate trot. They're not in a run and they're not walking. So it's the in between. And we're looking for them to be harnessed. And again, this is all about keeping that consistent pace. So whether you're using a 4-wheeler or a golf cart, which many of my clients have and seem to enjoy, it doesn't matter at all. Many people have run with their dogs and been able to keep them at a trot that way. I wouldn't be able to do it getting up beyond 30 minutes. I'd probably pass out. So could probably do the first 10, but that would be about it. I know Sarah likes to ride her bike with dogs, roading alongside. I'm not a huge fan. I've had a few clients call me with bumps and bruises after they were thrown off when the squirrel ran in front of them. So I don't recommend the bike, but certainly a 4-wheeler or a golf cart works fine. And then we get to just a normal walk when people don't have access to roading, to any sort of 4-wheeler ATV scenario, and they might live in the city. And really, I think we underestimate the benefit of a long walk. Again, if we're keeping that dog at a consistent pace, working up to 45 minutes to an hour, walking a dog is an excellent conditioning exercise. And it's something that I recommend a lot as I'm rehabbing dogs. I increase their walk time week by week. And I get a lot of complaints from clients about how much weight they're losing. And that was not the idea at all for the protocol. So I typically call it the limping Labrador diet as we get up to an hour walk. So a walk in general is an excellent exercise and can maintain a heart rate just as well. And certainly something that can be done if you do not have access to the ability to road. There was one question about dragging weights while roading, and that is something that both Sarah and I both agree is not something we would recommend. For some reason, there is a push out there to add weights to training in dogs, and we really do not see any true benefit to that. And certainly there's a potential for harm in many ways, and especially watching dogs get ready to road, that type of activity is very exciting for them. Once they get used to the whole process, I have a lot of dogs go crazy when they see the harnesses. So you can imagine if you add that adrenaline into a situation where they're pulling weight behind them, I think several bad things could happen. And that's not something that I think our dogs actually need. We're not asking them to pull any weight in their activity. So I don't think we need to train for that in any way. The second form of endurance conditioning is kayak swimming. And this is probably one of my favorite things that I like to do with the dogs, mostly because they enjoy it. They jump in. Their attitude about the swim is so different in this environment than it is in training, because they look at it as a game. They want to chase the kayak. They want to keep up with their competitor next to them. So many times I'll take 4, 5, 6 dogs even at one time. And if I'm working with a truck of dogs, I've worked up to a program where I know which dogs have a similar speed in their swimming and get them together. So everybody sort of keeps the same type of pace and they're all competing. And that's exactly what you want, because again, we're trying to maintain that heart rate consistently. So with the kayak swimming, one thing I would recommend is, number one, make sure you're comfortable in a kayak. So if a dog were to come up on you, Make sure you know how to swim because I have had a few people go in when the dogs have caught up with them. But most of the time they follow behind and they settle into the exercise quite well. I start with a very, very slow pace, and I'm trying to keep the dog in the water at all times. And again, many people don't have access to a large pond or kayak. So other scenarios to achieve the same type of activity would be placing a bumper at one end of the pond and sending the dog. And again, having it go back and forth across the pond, but you're trying to keep the dog out of the water as best as possible. Or I'm sorry, in the water as most as you can. So in other words, if he gets out, you don't want to give him a break on the shore. You want him to come right back in and swim back to you and go back and forth until you reach your minute capacity. And this is an exercise where I slowly increase the time. And the ideal scenario is to get the dog to a point where they're swimming 20 to 25 minutes consistently, staying in the water. And the reason for that is because I think about a 4 series and the potential for that dog to stay in the water or swim for a total of 20 minutes, that's usually pretty excessive for any big test. So if I can get them to be comfortable in the water for 25 minutes, then I know that whatever we throw at them in competition or training, they're going to be able to handle. One other scenario would be, especially if we don't have access to water or it's winter time, would be an underwater treadmill. And that is something that offers a great amount of resistance as well as the ability for containment. So you have a dog in a small space. Again, the band is moving underneath their feet and you're able to set the miles per hour and the time. And most of our Labradors, especially those that we've had to rehabilitate for injuries, they take quite well to the underwater treadmill. Again, it's a game, it's an activity that they enjoy. So it's something that can be a huge benefit to people that don't have access to these things like kayaks or large ponds, and certainly a great activity in the wintertime. I think Sarah is going to talk about strength training now.
You need to talk about
Jenell, I've got, I just want to jump in for just a second. Great stuff. I mean, I love the way you talk about your opinion on controlling their pace, and because I initially did a lot of free roading, and it is truly amazing how fatigued dogs get doing this when you think that some of the retrieves they do and the length they're going and the speed they're going, but they seem to get much more fatigued going at that slower pace, at that 6 mile per hour pace. But I just, before Sarah jumps in, we've had a couple questions, and one here, and I've never even thought of it, and I don't know, was Dwayne Ray asked, does any of this core strengthening or this conditioning, do you think it has any possible benefit to restricting a dog's likelihood of bloat, gastric torsion?
So the honest answer is I cannot speak to that. I do not know if that would have any impact or not, to be honest. You know, the mechanism of bloat is so complicated. We don't exactly know all the reasons why it happens in general. We think we do. We think we have certain predisposing factors, but I honestly can't say, and Sarah can jump in on this if she has a different opinion, but I would not be able to say that conditioning would be a preventative mechanism for bloat.
Sarah, do you have an opinion on that?
I don't. I haven't thought of it either, but no, I don't think it necessarily just, and this is totally my opinion, I don't think it necessarily decreases their odds, but certainly a dog that is well conditioned, has great strength and cardiovascular capability, they would be a better surgical candidate and hopefully they should have a better or improved odds of getting through that surgery. But that's certainly opinion. I don't have data to back that up. And like Jenell said, because of the mechanism of bloat and how we don't know everything about it.
Okay, one other quick question. Bobby Mazingo asked, what about the roading surface? How particular are you about the area you're conditioning these dogs on and the surface that they're running on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly, the biggest thing we want to take into consideration is the amount of impact on the joints. So even though we are trying to road them on a soft surface, like grass out in the field, on a trail, on a dirt trail, anything that is soft in nature, it's still an impactful exercise through the joints. So we definitely want to think about that, especially when we're going for long walks. So a lot of people ask me, if I'm in the city and I'm walking on the street for an hour, is that okay? And my personal opinion is no. I think that anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes on a hard surface is quite enough impact on the joints. And so if I'm asking that client to do a longer walk with the dog, whether it's rehabilitation or conditioning, I actually prefer them to be on a soft surface. So even if that requires them to walk the dog on the grass while they walk on the pavement, that's the better scenario. So that's a great question, especially for roading. We really need the softest surface possible. So dirt or grass or sand.
Hey guys, we'll try to get to as many questions as we can of yours as they keep getting fired in. Lots of great stuff. And I'll try to grab them as I see them. I know Sarah wants to start talking about strength conditioning. Isn't that where we're headed with this?
Yep. Can you, so another component in addition to cardiovascular or endurance training is strength training. Hans and Franz. So we know that strength equals speed. And we know that our dogs certainly need some speed just so we're not out there all day waiting for them, but they don't necessarily have to be the speediest dogs. Like, for example, an agility dog, however, there may be, hopefully there's some agility folks here, but so if there is a need for speed in whatever they're doing, whatever their sport or activity is, certainly strength training is a key component of that. One study showed that active adult dogs that had strength training under their belt and had a decent strength score based on this scoring mechanism they used would reduce the risk of injury by 66%. So 2/3 of dogs in a study had decreased injury if they were undergoing a strength training program. So that's fabulous. We also know that strength training can improve the longevity of senior and geriatric dogs, because as we all get older, we have that muscle atrophy or muscle wasting that's due to age, and it's called sarcopenia, and dogs have it too. So think about those labs that you've had that have they're retired and gotten older, and they're pretty bulky up front, and they have these tiny little hips and butt muscles that are much thinner. They're much thinner in the back, and that's a classic example of sarcopenia or muscle wasting due to age and probably lack of use as well. So when we strength train our dogs, it's really quite essential that it be low impact. We don't want to tax their bodies any more than we need to, their joints, their cartilage, their tendons or ligaments, because they're going to get plenty taxed in the field as they're moving over uneven surfaces, and the terrain changes quite quickly as they're running at a pretty quick pace. So we want it to be low impact. We want to think about, when we develop a strength training program, we think about what are we trying to strengthen and why? What groups of muscles or muscle in general are we trying to strengthen, get stronger? So we think about those things like that. We always you hear a lot about core muscles, certainly that's important, but know that the core muscles are certainly in the bottom of the abdomen or the ventral abdomen of the dog, but they extend up the side. So we have to think about those as well, and think about those muscles that extend along the spine. They're called paraspinal muscles, and they're supremely important in our athlete dogs, regardless of their sport. So those are quite important. So we need to think about how we can target those muscles as well. So, and then the big obvious ones, neck, front legs, hind legs, gluteals, thinking about how we target those muscles and why. You know, the biggest reason in our Labradors that are in the field hunting, hunt tests, field trials, hunting dogs are, you know, cruciate ligaments or disease is so prevalent. So we want to strengthen those gluteals, the hamstrings, the calf muscles, and the quadriceps in a very particular way. So it's not just some simple exercises that we throw out there, you know, thinking about what this dog is doing their job and how they're doing it and what their current condition is quite important. And again, it's going back to the individual dog, quite important of how we develop a strength training program for that particular dog. So we also want to take, just like human strength training, we also want to take the concept of working to overload. So we want those dogs to strength train until we overload those muscle cells. So those muscle cells actually break down and they rebuild themselves to a stronger capacity. So it's just like human strength training. But so we can think about ways to do that. And that's kind of our job, to think about ways to do that and not make assumptions that not everybody knows how to do that. So we can think about that. And we also want to think about not just the muscles, but the ligaments and the tendons and the joint capsules, all that's what we call soft tissue, because that's part of strength training in a sense that it's going along with the muscle for the ride, or it's moving the muscle, or it's help directing the muscle. So we can't certainly overload a muscle without taking into account all those other soft tissues like tendons and ligaments, because that's when we get into trouble as far as tendon, ligament strain, and injuries. So that's a huge part of it, that as exercise, as physical medicine veterinarians, that we think about a lot in our patients, whether they're rehabilitation or athletes. So especially the athletes. So strength equals speed. One strength exercise I'm going to tell you is something that we tell our dogs to do all the time, and especially field dogs, is sit. So sitting is a great strength exercise. So think about those quadriceps, think about the gluteals, which are in a little bit of a different place in dogs and humans. So those muscles are very affected by a sit. And when we have dogs that are consistently sitting in a kind of a lazy sit or to the side or things like that, then we're telling that dog's muscles and nervous system that it's okay. So a simple sit is a great strength training move, as well as standing, because we're trying, and we want that to be done correctly, because we're trying to get the nervous system and the muscles, the soft tissues, all to coordinate and do it properly. It sounds really kind of intense with all that, but we want it to be done properly. We want a nice, clean, square sit all the time, if at all possible. I know there's some uneven terrain, but you've probably heard of that. There's something out there called muscle memory. It's actually a great neurologist reminded me that it's actually nerve or neurologic memory, because the nerves are telling the muscles what to do. So we want to develop good patterns, and that's where that all starts, is the nervous system. So developing strength training exercises with good patterns to make best use of the nervous system, to further develop the muscular system, to further protect the soft tissue system, is what we do when we develop a strength training program. So, and that goes along with balance. That term that was thrown out earlier was proprioception. You'll see a lot of balls, I think I have some here, but see a lot of balls with dogs standing on them in great ways, in some ways that are maybe a little dangerous, and we cringe, like, don't get hurt. So balance or proprioception is a great part of a conditioning program where we get those muscles but we get the dog's muscles to be used that we don't always think about. It's not the quadriceps, it's not the hamstrings, it's not those big muscles, it's the small ones, it's the little postural muscles, the ones that help them sit up straight or help them sit square and sit properly. So balance work is insanely key in our dogs. And if we can somehow incorporate what we do for their job in the field or in the ring into that balance work eventually, is even more magical, because you can see changes in your dog that you never expected to see. And they may not be like, big magic, overwhelming, sudden changes, but you'll notice them in the way your dogs carry themselves, their gait, their posture, and even just in their top line, things like that. So balance, we're not going to talk about a ton, but balance is a key thing that you'll see us do with our dogs. But you'll also, I wish I could share a video. There's this great exercise that LeBron does. I'm a huge basketball fan. There's this great exercise that LeBron does as far as balance and proprioception and integrating ball handling into it. And you could probably find it on YouTube, but it's pretty great. He's pretty good at it. So that's a bit about strength training and balance, and then flexibility as far as our last component of a conditioning program.
Sarah, that's great stuff. Hey, was that Jinx that was on the ball that you had?
Yeah.
So you looked at Jenell working with, I think it was Poncho, the little yellow dog who'd never been on the ball. And it was all she could do with treats just to get him to climb on it. And then she barely got him to stand up. And then your dog just hopped right up, and you were kind of pushing her left and pushing her right. And she had to kind of fight to stay steady. And so that's obviously what you get to when they get more skilled at the balance ball.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah, for sure.
So we had a couple of folks I'd like to welcome. Hey, a good friend from the past, Lloyd Gilbertson. In the world of sled.
Lloyd, hi Lloyd.
Lloyd is, and Lloyd was probably, it might have been Lloyd in that sled dog race. I know he's run it a bunch. Hey, old friend Mark Redinger, Pat Danow, Michael Thomas, Carol Young. Thanks, Carol, for coming. Hey, Scott Leonescu's on. How about that? Scott, we miss you, buddy. Hunter Boyette. Anyways, lots of good stuff. Hey, one quick comment came in from Sarah Schull back on the bloat thing. Sarah's from Michigan State University, doing pretty much the same thing you guys are. And she had a thought. She said, just a thought. Conditioning helps with mental health, and often, many times, bloat dogs are a result of stress and anxiety. So might the relief of stress, anxiety have an indirect effect on preventing bloat? Well, that's an interesting perspective.
Yeah, for sure. We see, many stressed dogs will pant quite a bit. So certainly as they pant, they swallow more air. So it goes into their stomach and distends their stomach. That's a great thought.
All right, Jenell, you're going to talk about flexibility. Is that where we're headed now?
Yeah.
Flexibility, my least favorite subject. I was always yelled at by my coaches to stretch, and I hated it. So this is an interesting topic for dogs, specifically because we really need to qualify what we mean by flexibility. And I think what we have in our head is the types of stretches that we do as humans for ourselves and isolating certain areas of the body. But with dogs, it's obviously a very different anatomy. So we have to think about which way we're trying to move limbs to get certain things stretched properly. But the biggest issue, in my opinion, is the difference between passive and active stretching. And I think we need to qualify those two things. Passive stretching is the action in which we stretch the dog. So we pick up a limb and advance the limb in a certain direction, And essentially, we are stretching the dog for the animal. Where active stretching is where we're asking the animal to change a position, move their body a certain way, perform an action that allows them and their body to get into a position that actively stretches that area. And in our athlete dogs, in dogs that are not injured or not going through a rehabilitation process, active stretching is actually the more important flexibility type of exercise that we want to focus on. In rehabilitation, when we have dogs coming back from injury, I teach clients all the time how to stretch a bicep, how to stretch a quadricep, depending on what we're trying to rehabilitate, things that we're trying to loosen up. But in the dog that does not have injury, now we're asking that dog to go through certain motions, and this many times can turn into an exercise that not only is a stretch, but can be a strengthening exercise at the same time. So just a few things to review. Some of the things that Pat showed on the video, like the figure eight, watching the dog go in a figure eight pattern between your legs. That's something that is an excellent exercise, not only for balance, because the dog is shifting weight from side to side, but also it's almost a full body stretch. Essentially, you're seeing as you move the treat from one side of your leg to the other, the dog is stretching its neck muscles, its back muscles. The legs are moving in a certain direction. The forelimbs are in the opposite direction. So it's an interesting dynamic of a stretch because you're utilizing the entire body, but you're also gaining other things with it. There are other stretches like cookies to the sky or cookies to the side, which again, they act as stretches for cervical spine and allow the dog to transfer weight from one side of the body to the other. So again, not only are we stretching, but we're also shifting weight, and it becomes a strengthening exercise as well. So there are a lot of different things we can do with the dog being in an active motion that is stretching them and allowing them to tell us when too much is too much. And that's the reason why I prefer the active over passive as well, because many times when we're passively stretching, we think that we're taking the dog into a stretch to a point that they're comfortable in. And really the only way to know that is if the dog reacts to that stretch. So pulls its leg back or starts licking its lips, starts looking at us like, what are you doing to me? So these are all things that are not necessarily easy for us to read at times. And so many times we can end up overstretching or causing more of an issue by passively stretching. Where in an active stretch, if a dog is not flexible enough to get through an exercise, they are not going to be able to physically complete that exercise. So they may resist, just like going through your legs in a figure eight. They may, when you turn the head to one side to do a cookie stretch, they may only make it to their shoulder on one side and to the middle of their body on the other side. So these are great ways to assess flexibility by allowing the dog to go through the motion and show you exactly how flexible or not flexible they are in doing these certain motions.
All right.
Did you mute her? Oh.
No, I didn't. Robin wanted to know if I muted you. You just quit talking. So we've got Carol Cassidy here, and who else has joined us here? Hey, my brother Terry Burns. I'll be darned. But we had a question. Now this isn't really super consistent with this, but the question gets asked all the time about dew claws and should they be removed? And that Pat Dano asked this. Let me get back to that. What's your feeling on the removal of dew claws pertaining to athletic injuries?
Well, I think Sarah won this bet as far as whether this question would be answered tonight or not. So I feel very strongly about not removing dew claws because I do believe that the dew claws are used in certain circumstances, specifically when the dog is stopping abruptly, like when we run a blind every single day. So it's something that certainly is there for a reason. It has a tendon attachment, and that tendon attachment attaches to a main tendon of the carpus. So in my personal experience watching these dogs over the years, I have only had one dog in my 10 years in the field suffer an injury of a dew claw where I had had to remove the actual dew claw. And that was because the dew claw was left untrimmed and did get caught on something in the field and had to be removed. But I've also seen the flip side of that, where a puppy has had the dew claw removed and removed improperly, and it's caused some major issues down the line as an older dog. So I think there is something to be said for the possibility of issues in the future, and also the limited amount of potential injury, at least that I have seen and experienced with dogs that have dew claws remaining. Again, it's one of those things that's, you have to remember to clip them and keep them short. But when we watch specifically videos of agility dogs that are coming off of A-frames and turning in through weave pulls, you can see how they engage that dew claw and use it as a helpful tool to not only stop themselves, but also to be able to turn more efficiently. And I actually recently had a field trial client who had a dog suffer a almost career-ending and may potentially still be career-ending carpal arthrodesis. The dog did not have dew claws, slipped in the field on dew in the morning when he was doing a blind, and had nothing there to stop himself. And she said she actually watched the carpus go all the way down to the ground and luxate. So it's one of those things that I think at the end of the day, if that dew claw is torn in the field, we're going to take it off. That's the treatment. So why not leave it if there is potential benefit?
So who won the bet again?
Am I muted? I said it would be asked, and I'm going to give my 2 cents really quick. I'm not totally on the other end of Jenell, but I have yet to see the evidence that removing dew claws causes more disease. There's an agility study out there with agility dogs suggesting that dew claws removal increases the chance of having carpal or wrist disease. And I'm not convinced just from that study that that's the case. I certainly think that they have a purpose and they're used. I've seen several torn off in the field, and it's a bloody mess. So, but you're right, we just remove them when they get torn. In sled dogs that wear booties, it's something that's typically done, and I would still do that. But I'm not convinced yet. I think it got to be a hot topic, and there was a video that many people out there have probably seen of the golden retriever, the dog coming out of ice and pulling itself up, which is fabulous. But I'm just not convinced, only because I'm a bigger nerd than Jenell and need to see the data. So.
Okay. Well, I love opinions, and you guys both had strong ones. That's great. So, Sarah, you're going to talk about heat stress and heat acclimate.
We are. I didn't know how long you wanted to go.
Well, you're right. I mean, it's 9:04. We're an hour into this thing, and we're only through 4 of 9 or 10 topics, and like always, these things could go on all night. Maybe we'll just kind of glance at the rest of this and see what. I certainly think that dealing with heat and preventing heat stroke is important. Jenell was going to talk about cranial cruciate ligament disease, some older dog stuff, maybe some supplements. Do we want to pick a couple of these things and just stress upon them? I mean, what do you think is of most value here?
Well, I'm just looking at what people were asking. There were a couple questions about heat tolerance and how do you acclimate a dog, and then more some about cruciate ligament disease and supplements. People always want to know about supplements. I mean, this really is like a weekend seminar we have in this outline.
Sarah, why don't you go through talk a little bit about the heat, because that's certainly can be life and death stuff.
Yeah, I won't go too deep into it, but there's some data that's come out recently from the military. I'm going to look over here at this paper from the military, individual who's done some research, and some other groups that have studied it. But we know that that prevention is the best tool we have for heat stroke. Avoiding heat stroke, and that's the big things obviously are looking at temperature and humidity, and we know that that dogs will certainly run to their death, and many of us have seen that due to heat, so it's really unfortunate. A couple just big points I want to throw out there. You know, we're big promoters of getting your dog lean and trim, and one of those big reasons is fat. We know is an insulator, so the leaner they are, the more we know muscle does the energy and produces heat, but fat is a better insulator. So the less fat they have on them, then the less insulation they'll have, which is great. And we, just like humans, they have abdominal fat as well. So some of these dogs we see in the field are certainly a little overweight and can get leaner. If we look at body condition score on a scale of 1 being emaciated and 9 being like a table you can put a drink on because they're so fat, we want these dogs to be like a 4 out of 9, not a 5, not a 6. And I argue that a little bit with some pros, because there's certainly the public perception of how, especially pros, they get it really hard of how these dogs are treated. But I always bring up, and I have a picture on my phone of a marathon runner. Not that our dogs are marathon runners, but they're at least field dogs, but they can be near it. We certainly want little body fat. So that's a big one. Another big thing that we know from some recent studies is that, so I have these first aid kits that I'm selling, and I put the little thermometer in there, and every time I kind of shake my head, because we know thermometers aren't always the greatest indicator of the core body temperature. So, and that's been proven nicely recently from some core body temperature tools that have been shown that those core body temperatures, and say those little capsules that are swallowed and gone through the gut, those core temperatures are vastly different from the rectal temperatures that we take. But unfortunately, in the field or in a clinic or most everywhere outside of anyone who has these nice little temperature capsules, that's the best tool we have. So know that if you have a dog that's overheating, you take its rectal temperature with a digital thermometer and it's 106 or 107 or 108, then certainly know that core temperature, their core is hotter. Just remember that it's hotter. So again, lean dogs certainly cool down more efficiently and more quickly than heavier dogs. A couple things, this is from a conference in November. Dogs that, what was it? There was something else in here. Just people were wondering about acclimatizing to heat and to try and avoid heat injuries. So we don't have great studies in dogs. There's a study out here in horses where it took horses on average, they were hoping, their hypothesis was thinking it would take these horses 2 weeks to acclimate to a new environment, but it actually took them 60 days. So it took them 60 days, 2 months to acclimate to their new environment. By then, a lot of us are, these dogs might move on to a different environment. So no, it probably takes longer than what we think in dogs. And then hydration is of utmost important in getting these dogs to acclimate to a newer temperature or new environment with greater temperatures. So certainly hydration techniques that we haven't talked about, but making sure that clean water, fresh water is always available. There are some what I call hyperhydration products out there that can improve the hydration status of dogs. It helps pull more water into the body and different parts of the body. Those are all pretty important to help acclimate and decrease the odds of heat stroke. And wedding dogs, I have my mediocre dog and I, the mediocre handler and I run field trials, and frequently I go to the line in the summer in Colorado and I get her wet, whether it's I have a body of water to have her jump in, or I just hose her off. And rarely do I see people getting their dogs wet before they run them, as a way of just getting them cooler to start with before they run. So that's something that I kind of put out there, but just try and get people to do. But that's not a whole lot of specifics, but just know it takes longer than we think to acclimate. Hydration is key to acclimating, and rectal temperatures are vastly underestimating what core body temperatures are. So, but we do know that well-conditioned dogs do dissipate heat much more efficiently, or get rid of that heat much more efficiently. So, and then just one last thing, people want to give like electrolytes and supplements like that, like Gatorade or some sort of Gatorade. And we don't have to give those to dogs, and we don't need to, because of research that's been shown, that they conserve electrolytes in a different way than humans do. And they don't necessarily sweat and lose all those electrolytes like humans do. They don't become hypernatremic or high sodium levels or things like that. So the best thing is water, just plain water.
So Sarah, Arlie Reynolds came to a national in St. Louis a number of years ago as a he's a Purina guy, but Cornell and highly respected and a sled dog guy. And he said to me, he said, Pat, he said, I think 40% of these dogs running this national, in my opinion, are on the brink of being obese. And I went, what? These are the best 100 dogs in North America. You're saying what? But he was that adamant that as a whole, kept our dogs too heavy. Now, I looked at it a different way, but Arlie's certainly, somebody you have to take seriously. And that was a strong comment. Yeah. I know we're getting deep into this and we need to wrap this up. I'd love for Sarah to just do a little bit on supplements. Yeah. Oh, excuse me, Jenell, do a little bit on supplements, and in relation to maybe older dogs or a couple of the other things here, and because we had a number of stuff here, but we need to wind this down. And Jenell, maybe you can talk a little bit about that. And I need to unmute you, don't you? So you can talk. Let's try that.
How's this?
There you go.
Okay. So I'm just going to talk about the three main supplements that I recommend for our field guys. One being glucosamine chondroitin, second being adequine, and the third being omega-3s. So there are a lot of different supplements out there, a lot of different things that we've all used over the years, but these are the three core things that I think apply to all of our dogs as athletes. And The big question here is, at what age do we start? For puppies, I put them on a glucosamine chondroitin supplement, and my preferred is Dasiquin Advanced, mostly because, as Sarah mentioned, I am a brat and I do believe in clinical science. And as you know, when you go to any health food store, there are a ton of supplements, hundreds and hundreds, and many of them we have actually no data on in terms of what is in them and if they are efficacious in any way. Dasiquin Advanced is one of those products that does have clinical science behind it. We know for a fact that it decreases inflammation within the joint when it is present. And it is something that over time has been studied and changed based on their studies many, many times over. So they've added new things to the supplement itself, one being avocado and soybean extracts or saponifieds. And the latest version, the advanced version, has added a curcumin type supplement, which is, as we know in humans, highly anti-inflammatory. So Dasiquin Advanced is something I start at the age of 4 months, mostly because I know that many of our puppies, by the time they're 6 months, are doing exercises which I may or may not always agree with in terms of the amount of impact that we put on our puppies. So for that reason, at 4 months, I make sure everybody's covered. And I know that if that puppy were to create inflammation in their joint, which they probably will, that we have something there to help at least in some way decrease over time and prevent cartilage damage. And that's really what this is all about, keeping inflammation in joints at bay, which is ideally a scenario that decreases cartilage breakdown over time. That's what we're looking to do in all of these supplements. With that said, we move on to Adequin, which is an injectable supplement, and probably one of the best things we have for joint inflammation overall in any joint of the body. This supplement is something that's been around for quite a few years. Again, great science behind it. Started in the equine world and was used primarily in horses for many years until they created a canine product. This is a product that essentially bathes the joint, is the best way to put it. So if there is inflammation that's actively happening within that joint, if Adequin is in the system, it's going to talk to the cartilage and it's going to say, hey, we need to stop that inflammatory process. We need to slow it down, stop throwing inflammatory mediators in the joint, and overall decrease the inflammation and help with pain. So again, we're looking to create an environment in the joint that allows for a healthy joint fluid to be present, to make sure that we're not breaking down cartilage, we're not creating arthritic change, arthritis to build up in the joint. So Adequin is one of those things that, like I said, has been studied for years. And there was a recent study used in puppies with hip dysplasia. At a very young age, diagnosed young at 4 months with pen hip. And those dogs were placed on Adequin and reevaluated at 12 months. And their laxity scores, their hip laxity scores actually improved just by using Adequin alone. So very, very powerful supplement. And I think something that we're going to find in future years has other benefits as well, just based on what we have already found. So I usually recommend starting Adequin at 12 months, to be honest, because it's an expensive supplement. So not everybody wants to start it early. And I also recommend a higher dosage range than most people. And that is mostly because of the mechanism of action in decreasing inflammation. So it is technically a monthly maintenance supplement. You start with an induction series of twice a week for 4 weeks, and then it's a once monthly maintenance after that. But for our guys in active training and active competition, I feel with the amount of inflammation that we know is occurring in their joints, just like any athlete that does any sort of activity consistently every day, every week for months on end, we know that inflammation is going to be present. And the best thing we can do is have something on board to ward that off. So I recommend the Adequin given every 2 weeks as a maintenance therapy for our athletic dogs. And if there's a time where the dog is at home, not performing, not training, sitting on the couch, maybe over Christmas, then I back down to once a month at that point. But it's one of those supplements that I strongly believe in. We use it in older dogs as well for pain management and arthritic change. So one of those top 3 that I think everyone should consider, even with the expense. And then the third one is omega-3s. And again, this is a supplement that has been studied immensely in both humans and dogs, but it all comes down to the science behind the actual product that you select. And for that reason, I have 2 very specific products that I recommend. One being Nordic Naturals Omega-3 PET. It's a canine formula that they provide. They also make human supplements. And then Well-Actin, which is made by Nutramax. Nutramax is the company that also makes the Dasaquin supplement. So with those 2 supplements, again, it's a daily dosing every day. Omegas have so many positive benefits for the body, not only in joints, but eyes, skin, certainly numerous benefits to brain function, neurofunction that we have found not only in dogs, but also in humans. So across the board, I would say it's definitely, in my opinion, one of those things worth adding to the food. There are omegas in most of our large breed dog foods, but again, they're at subtherapeutic levels, which means that if we have active inflammation in joints, they're not at levels that actually will help decrease inflammation. So that's the reason why I like to add on a secondary supplementation.
Jenell, thank you again. Sarah, thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are awesome. Absolutely awesome. You got, I want to tell everybody that we will have your telemed links posted on the Facebook. So there's lots of questions. Take advantage of these guys. Whether you're in their area or not, they're incredibly generous and knowledgeable as how obvious that is. And boy, we kept you past your bedtime. It's 9:22 Eastern time. We said an hour. I knew we'd go over, but we need to start to wind this down. And I guess I want to wrap this up. I'm looking here at Alex Abraham sent this right off the bat, and he said, tell me why I need to do this. Everybody doesn't want to sit there and watch a dog run next to a four-wheeler instead of doing another test. Catherine Mines asked, does this conditioning help our dogs with heat tolerance? I know the answer to that. You guys know the answer to that. There's something Vince Lombardi would say. If you don't know Vince Lombardi, great Packer coach, Hall of Famer, one of the greats. Vince said, fatigue makes cowards of us all. And I'll tell you, I've looked down in a dog's face, in his eyes, getting ready to send for the last bird in the 10th series. And when you've done your homework and they're physically prepared, you've got confidence that they're going to stay safe and that they can perform. One of those videos was the 10th series dog showing the distances that animal was going to travel if he did nothing more than went in a straight line. After an 8-day event, the ability to stay focused, give you his all, and stay safe, I don't know how you can argue it. Every athlete of every sport conditions, and we're simply just becoming more educated on that. And thanks to you guys, you're doing a great job in helping us. And my wife's creeping over here, I think, to tell me something. But Robin's helped so much. And thank you guys again. We're going to keep this going. And Robin, do you have something you want to say? No, she says no. She wants to mute me. Everybody's unmuted. Almost everybody. All right, guys. Thank you so much. We're going to end the meeting. Good night.